Welcome to the Wealth Tech Insider. I'm today's host, Peter Warren. Great to be with you. And we have a really special episode today. So we have Marcus Field here from IRESS, who's going to talk about some really exciting and I think of national importance research that IRESS has been doing, particularly into the financial literacy space. So this is a nice deviation from the normal tech-heavy type things we talk about on the Wealth Tech Insider, and it's really wonderful to have Marcus on, who I've known and worked with on a number of different initiatives. Finura and IRESS do a lot of work together. So great to have you on the pod, Marcus. How's your day been?
Thank you very much for having me. It's been great. I feel like the wind down to Christmas is coming, but not yet here. It's been a crazy time post the release of the research, and obviously there's quite a bit going on at IRESS at the moment too, with a new CEO and lots of stuff in the wings.
Yeah, it's funny how Christmas in particular, all the deadlines become high energy, high intensity, but equally, I think whilst, IRESS has certainly had plenty of change, there's actually been a lot of work which has been happening over a number of years now, actually, and particularly since I've got to know you in your time at IRESS, you've actually been building quite a body of work. Do you just want to explain to our listeners what you do at IRESS and a bit about your background?
Absolutely. So I've got two key parts to my portfolio. One is a community that we run called Advisely, best practice community aimed at helping the broader advice market become better practitioners, run better businesses and grow more quickly. So that's about 10,500 subscribers today, of which you deliver great content out to that community as well. So that's part of my portfolio, and that is designed to IRESS have a much broader conversation with the market than just software, because at the end of the day, the advice community that we serve run businesses like anyone else, and the more we can support with insights on running better businesses, the better job we're going to do at getting advice out to more people. So that's part one. Part two is I also run a part of IRESS's portfolio that delivers financial education and the infrastructure to deliver that at scale, under the brand of the Financial Knowledge Centre, used by about 100 advice practices to deliver post-advice service, and also in the guise of a financial literacy offering for super funds. So Host Plus, for instance, use the same underlying content composition, but with a very different infrastructure. So that's the other part of my portfolio, delivering financial capability content and infrastructure to help the industry, both advice and super, deliver advice in its many forms at a much bigger scale.
And Marcus, how did you end up joining IRESS? Because we all come to our organisations from different backgrounds, and we never expect to end up where we are. How did you end up at IRESS?
Entirely by accident, to be honest, Pete. So I was part of a business with two other founders, Vanessa and Paul, called Evolution Media. We launched a business called No More Practice that grew really successfully. It was both CPD and professional development content for financial advisors, as well as a series of consumer education plays, including Channel 9 TV show called Secrets of the Money Masters. We sold that business to OneView in 2019. And then, of course, IRESS acquired OneView, and the rest is history. That's how I ended up here.
It's funny how sometimes even if we're a little fish, we can find ourselves being eaten by a big fish, depending on how things end up. And I have to say, No More Practice had a really stellar reputation. You were almost, I always had found content in our sector quite dry and black and white, and No More Practice definitely was a next level in terms of what it could do. And no doubt you've sort of tried to keep that going with IRESS. And IRESS is a really interesting business to me on many fronts, because you obviously serve so much of the financial advice market, which is the IFA market, which is such a big driver. But obviously now, with your increasing representation of providing digital advice services to super funds, you must be bordering on the many millions of Australians now that engage in some way with technology provided by IRESS.
Yeah, very much so. Both through the core X-Plan offering and, as you said, digital advice offerings, we are actually able now to connect with literally millions of Australians. And as we think about the future for IRESS, the ability to help the industry deliver component parts of the great thing that we call advice through lots more distribution channels is a really important focus for me in my portfolio, but also for IRESS more broadly. A lot of work done, obviously, through the transformation process of the last couple of years. Not all of it without pain by any means, but what it has done is boil us down to a core wealth and trading business with the capacity to now invest in supporting the industry to evolve for its next big chapter. And that's going to require lots of change. It's going to require investment in lots of areas. And fortunately, the sometimes difficult work that's been done over the last few years puts us in a much, much better position to do that well.
Yeah, I think for what it's worth, from an external observer, I would say already starting to see the benefits of that, no doubt, painful process to simplify IRESS
Yep.
resonate, because it feels like a much more focused business on what it's doing and what it's not doing, and that's as a small business owner, that's such a hard thing to do. But I would say, those tangible proof points around what you've done with Advisely and your engagement with Ensemble platform, the conference you actually ran this year in Melbourne, which I thought was just a cracker.
Yeah,
They
thank you.
are quite tangible things that IRESS is really starting to do. So, I know IRESS has sometimes copped a hard time on occasion over the years, and that's what happens when you have such a strong position in the market. But I have to say that the way you and your team have taken that on and actually delivered some tangible things and just got on with it, and has been, impressive. And I think the reality is that if I look at our wealth tech sector, as I said to you and many others in the industry, there's probably 4 or 5 companies with balance sheets the size of IRESS that actually were really dependent on to make investments in things like this for us to be a successful sector. So, and I guess, to turning our thoughts to sort of the research, and you sort of mentioned that, it can be easy to be a short-term focused business and figure when you're publicly listed like
Yeah.
IRESS, but you've actually been making some investments in, I'd say, some longer term research and thought leadership. So last year was the big shift. This year now the big lift. Could you just talk us through what was the strategy when you sort of put together? Why were you thinking that you needed to do some really specific research into financial literacy?
So the big shift last year was a piece of research to answer the question, where is the advice industry headed over the next, say, 5 years, out to 2030? And that was intended to inform both IRESS's strategy, as well as, given our place in the market, we believe that we have an obligation to help shine a light on behalf of the industry for where the opportunity is headed. And so, to your point, we are one of the few very big players in this space. And I think there's been some instances where maybe we haven't acted as quickly as we might have liked in retrospect. But that was the beginning of us saying there is huge change going on, quite clearly, both technologically driven and from the point of view of how society is shifting. So that big shift research was simply to ask the question, where do we see the opportunity for advice as we know it in 5 years from now? And the key numbers from that essentially were 7 mega trends set to usher in a brand new era of prosperity, 500,000 new clients, potentially $2 billion in incremental new advice fees by 2030. There's not many industries who can claim to be in such a great situation from the pure commercial sense, where there is such a limited supply and so much demand. And that was a great story from the point of view of this industry has come to a level of maturity. And from an IRESS point of view, and broader industry, we face enormous opportunity, but there is also some challenges with that. One of which was that report, The Big Shift, also re-highlighted the fact that there are 12 million Australians with unmet advice needs. And that's a number that's been covered pretty broadly for a fair period of time. And we've pointed to regulation, technology costs, a whole bunch of reasons contributing to how expensive advice is as the main driver for why advice remains the domain of such a small proportion of Australians. But given the work that we've done historically in the financial literacy space, and knowing that over the last 5 years, 10 years, financial literacy has gone backwards in Australia, we had a sneaking suspicion that there may well be other things materially at play in stopping those 12 million Australians from getting the kind of, and I'll use the word help rather than advice, because it is a broader remit. There would be other barriers likely in the way of those 12 million getting the help that they need. Many people don't understand what advice is. Even if you explain it to them, they may or may not value it. They certainly wouldn't value it to the tune of what it actually costs. This year's research really was a follow-up question to our colleagues at Deloitte Access Economics to say, what else is in the way of those 12 million with unmet help, guidance, and advice needs being better off? That was the underpinning driver. And again, the driver there for IRESS, both as an entity unto ourselves and as kind of steward for the industry, if you'll will allow me to use that term,
Yep.
is that is a problem statement that we all need to be really closely looking at for the evolution of the industry and for the evolution of Australia and many other markets as well that are very, very similar. And it's often the case, I think, we look at that 12 million figure that gets bandied about and it gets kind of depersonalized into just a number. But
Mm-hmm.
actually, when you think about it, how many of our friends and family have all their money stuff sorted? The answer is not many. And actually, that's why we sort of shine a light on the problem statement that is the financial capability crisis that is actually arguably more important than bringing down holistic advice for the future of the industry and for Australia.
There's been such a focus, I suppose, on our sector and its failings over the years, and whether that's advice and probably more recently with superannuation itself as a construct, and lots of fingers being pointed at, advisors, regulators, super funds, even tech companies from time to time about the collective role that we play. And it is easy to play the blame game, and I think a lot of energy gets expended on that. But I think what I loved about the research you've done is that it actually, that there's probably some finger pointing that we all need to do it ourselves in the mirror about what are we doing as a society to help, Australians equip themselves to make better financial decisions. And, one of the things that played out, I think, in the Royal Commission, from my observation, was there is always a risk in society that if we are focused on the blame game more than anything else, we don't address what I think is a better solution, which is actually educating people to prevent these things from happening in the first place. So I guess what I'm kind of keen to understand from you is that what do you feel are the key things that Australia hasn't done well in terms of educating what should be a very well-educated society on money?
Yeah, look, there's a few drivers, and I'll just use the kind of opportunity to cover off the key stats because it's good to understand the scale of the problem that we're talking about. The headline findings of the research were nearly 2/3 of Australians have what's deemed as low financial capability, and even more scary, less than half are even aware of it. Now, that sums up to the statement, not only do many Australians not know what they're doing when it comes to money, they're actually blind to it. And the downstream impacts of that are really significant. It's a direct correlation to the fact that 2 in 3 don't have an emergency fund. More than 80% say that they felt significant financial stress as a result of money worries, and that has affected how they show up in both life and money.
So, Marcus, I've always thought Australia's a pretty progressive society, and we are the envy of many countries with our superannuation system, that's for sure. But yet, this research is telling us that we have a long way to go when it comes to financial literacy. What do you think's got us to this place where Australians are just so uninformed about their money?
There's a few factors. It is easy to point the finger of blame at the industry and some of the bad actors and those sorts of things. But the reality is that the issue is more root cause. We are one of the few developed nations that doesn't mandate financial literacy in our schooling programs, and that's certainly where it starts. New Zealand, for instance, is introducing mandatory financial literacy from next year. There's many, many other more progressive nations who have financial literacy or capability as part of their mandatory schooling requirements. We wouldn't let a kid get out on the roads without doing 160 hours of driving practice, and yet at age 17, when you get your first job, you can get a buy now, pay later access to credit, which is just crazy when we don't give people those fundamental skills. So that's where it starts. We haven't done enough work to break the taboo. So there's been a huge effort put into breaking the taboos around things like mental health and, sex. We'll talk about anything. But when it comes to money, it remains an uncomfortable conversation. So we've got a lot of work to do there, but equally beyond those systemic issues of not teaching people early, not making it okay to talk about money in a family and school setting, there's also probably not been the right configuration for the industry from a regulatory point of view to help with this as well. That's something that we're really keen to see change moving forward. General advice has really tight guardrails, personal advice, really tight guardrails, but there's this really huge, awkward middle ground between the two that we're loosely calling guidance. And the UK has done a lot more work to define what that is, but is so important for the skills of our industry to be able to help in that job. Doesn't remove that initial job at hand. And we're talking to government at the moment about reinvigorating the financial capability strategy that's gathering dust right now, and looking at enforcing financial literacy through schools. It's critical.
I think the thing that really stood out for me and troubled me somewhat was, I mean, so the research you've done says 59% of Australians are measured to have a low level of financial capability, and the
Yep.
evidence even more concerning is, 10 million Australians feel that their financial situation or their difficulties have impacted their ability to participate in society. So people are feeling isolated with their money
Yep.
troubles. 2 in 3 do not have an emergency fund. I mean, people are living hand to mouth from what I can gather and from this research. But the one that I couldn't reconcile was that we've actually seen a net decline in financial literacy, despite
Yep.
the fact that the access to internet and research and information's never been greater. But it's going backwards. Have you got any thoughts onto why that's the case?
Yeah. Well, look, information's everywhere, right? And has been for quite a period of time. We've had an explosion in the types of financial products. We've had an explosion in our ability to access information, and that is overwhelm. And so, in some ways, when we're not teaching the foundations of financial literacy from a very early age, it kind of follows that when we're exposed to such an overwhelm of other things, then our knowledge about something that we're not encouraged even to learn about is going to diminish. It kind of feels like a self-fulfilling prophecy in many ways.
And do you find that, you and I are both parents. So I have an 8-year-old and a 6-year-old, and we were just talking before the podcast. Your son's giving you a hand at work today to cover for some school holidays things.
I'm not sure it classifies as giving a hand.
Yeah,
playing on his Nintendo.
But I mean, I'm having some early experiences teaching my kids about pocket money, and they've got a Spriggy account, and actually I see quite a different sort of two behaviours in both my kids on their attitudes to money already. One a good, one not so good. Do you think that do parents need to play more of a role here as well as schools?
Most definitely. Yeah, no, absolutely. And for the record, $390 pair of football boots is not good value. Just clear.
Or $400 on football cards, which I think was our bill this year on AFL footy cards.
Jeez.
I know.
Yeah, when one of my children says, it's not that bad. There's some that are $600. Clearly, in some capacity, we aren't doing the job that we need to. Absolutely, parents need to play a really important role. But often it's the case, like I didn't get taught about money getting brought up other than to be frugal, which is something that I railed against because I just didn't see the sensibility in it. And so in the absence of any formal teaching framework or certainty of what is good and what is not, you end up with essentially inheriting the perspectives of those who went before you. And so I'm probably not the best teacher for my children, if I'm honest. I'd love to be doing a better job of that. And I think there's a really important role for both government, schooling, and potentially our industry to help provide a better framework for that kind of conversation. Like, how do I teach him that $390 is a ridiculous amount of money to pay for a pair of football boots for an 11-year-old who's going to wear them for 4 months and then decide he wants something else? I mean, it's a perennial challenge, right? Don't get me wrong. I had the very same dialogue with my parents about a pair of shoes versus a pair of Dunlop volleys or whatever it was. But yes, parents absolutely need to play a role here for sure.
And, have there, in terms of in the research, I mean, because it feels to me like this is not just a young people problem or a middle-aged problem or old, it's everybody, right?
Correct.
And so therefore, you could argue that there's probably some small things we could do for young people that compounded will have some major benefits down the track. But I guess my attention does turn a little bit to those people who are probably in that 3 or 4 million approaching retirement stage, who haven't had no advice. And I don't know, maybe you might feel it's all too late and they're a bit stuffed and what can it possibly do at this stage? I mean, is there specific things out of the research that you think advisors or super funds could think about for that pre-retiree generation who may fall in that category?
Yeah, most definitely. So obviously there's not so much to be done from an accumulation point of view at that
Mm,
point. However, we hear perennial stories of two polar opposites as we transition into retirement. Those who withdraw everything and splurge it and it's
mm,
gone. And so
mm,
the original intent of superannuation is not fulfilled. And then we've got those at the other end of the spectrum who are so nervous about what they should and shouldn't spend that they hang on to all of it and live an
mm.
incredibly frugal, arguably maybe not the best life that they could for the remainder of their life. So how do you support them with the simple, light forms of advice that tell them how to manage that better is a really important question. Absolutely. And in not all instances does that necessarily need holistic advice. Sometimes that is about connecting with others in a similar situation, giving them the basics to be able to do calculations and those sorts of things that they, again, in many instances, because of a lack of financial awareness, don't even go and seek.
I think the other thing that was quite troubling for me too, and I would say surprising, was the gap. Now I'm conscious you've got two white males on this podcast, so I'm going to be
Yeah.
careful what I say here. But in a lot of other areas in society, I see women streaking ahead. I see it in
Yeah.
education system, university
Yeah.
admissions, even on the sporting field now.
Yeah.
And so, but when it comes to financial literacy, there is a noticeable gap between financial literacy between men and women generally.
Yeah.
I'm curious to sort of unpack that a little bit and what's contributing to that in this research.
So, as you said, overall, as a society, we've been going backwards in financial literacy terms for some of the reasons that we've just talked about. But there's been a gap in a pure financial literacy sense for a period of time. That gap has gotten worse. So, overall, we're doing worse than we were, but actually, women are doing worse again.
Mm,
And there's a whole raft of reasons kind of put forward in the research for why that is. Parents are still less likely, the research found, to talk to their daughters about money than they are their
I just
sons.
find that unbelievable. Yeah.
I do too. I absolutely do too. And again, speaking from a personal perspective, I'm more worried about what my son's going to do than my daughter. 'Cause she'll go and find the information. She's that kid. But again, these are legacy stereotypes
Mm,
probably learned from our parents that should be really gone by now, but they're not. It's just a
mm,
simple fact. And unfortunately, that gap, when it interplays with the other issues that women face throughout a career of career pauses and all of the thing, the gender pay gap as well,
mm,
it becomes a multiplier effect. And so it's a triple whammy in many ways, putting women vastly worse off than their male counterparts, not just in hard financial terms, but in stress terms and all of those sorts of things. It's a real problem statement. Absolutely. I mean, I'm quite encouraged as I hear more women joining the advice industry. I think
mm,
that's part of the solution. We've seen some really interesting stories pop up of dedicated women only offerings from advisors, not just anchored in holistic advice, but in coaching and in pure general advice and those kind of spaces. I'm really excited to see some of that. I hope that we see a lot more of it because it's absolutely crucial. Women are not as well served as they should be by the system or our industry today.
and there's probably a lot of hope there in the sense that it could just be an education and outreach issue because other research I've seen over the years certainly suggests that women take lower levels of risk with their
Yep.
money and less likely to do stupid things. And
Yep.
I even see that from a technology point of view. A lot of businesses we work with, very rarely is a bad tech decision at the hands of a female. We tend to for a whole bunch of reasons, I think, on that side. And certainly young men in particular seem more
Mm.
vulnerable to gambling and all those other sort of pieces as well. So, but it just surprised me, I guess, Marcus, because there's been so many well publicized women orientated finance initiatives and those things,
Yep.
but for whatever reason, they're clearly not landing as well. And maybe this is more those bespoke offers are actually what's more what's been required potentially as well.
Yeah, but it also extends to and the comment that you made before about education and outreach It's only part of the picture. And it's a really
Mm.
important distinction, specifically in the research. Capability is distinct from literacy in a really important way. It's application. And
Mm.
it's so critical that any of these solutions give people the ability to apply the knowledge and to learn from those experiences in a safe kind of way. Such a critical distinction, because all the theory in the world is completely useless, clearly, if you
Yep.
don't apply it. And there's
Yeah.
not that many safe environments to be able to learn about this sort of stuff and apply it.
Yeah, I think the stigmatism issue is probably a bigger one because I've noticed even in my personal life where it's been quite obvious that the people who are in the most amount of financial trouble are the least likely to talk about it. And there's obviously pride and various other things there as well. But I would even say I've observed behaviors of people going into avoidance mode on their money. I remember even once in my own personal life, I was going through a tough patch at one stage about a decade ago, and I just stopped looking at a lot of my money things, and it was to my detriment. And I don't know, is that a mental health thing where people go to avoidance mode? If people are getting divorced, do women shut down about their money all of a sudden? There's probably a whole bunch of that stuff. And you're right, because the mental health side of things, I've been a long advocate for public discourse on mental health, and that seems to we've achieved so much in the last decade.
Most definitely.
But the money side, yeah, it just hasn't quite landed yet.
No, it doesn't. And it's an interesting, one of the other things in the research was the downstream impact. Again, it's not the entire picture, but with the connection drawn between lower financial capability and a much greater likelihood of not having an emergency fund and feeling stress, the downstream impact of that in broad life is mental health per se. And the
Mm.
sort of avoidance that you described is absolutely a direct outcome of feeling shame of where they've gotten to. The other impact, though, that is connected is how we show up in work. And this is something that we're really starting to look at more closely from both an IRESS and follow-up research point of view. If you are stressed about money, you show up not just in life differently, but also in work. It qualifies that if you are financially stressed, you're losing as much as 11 hours a week in the workplace because you are debilitated. You're sitting there worried about how you're going to pay this month's rent or whatever it might be, and you're not actually doing anything. And there's a double whammy there. There's a self-worth impact to the individual, and there is a employer impact. And they projected that forward. That's costing the Australian economy over $40 billion a year because people are stressed and don't know what to do about it, don't know who to talk to. They're showing up in the workplace and being unproductive. So we think there's a really interesting other ingredient in all of this that is the employer. We are starting to see a growing interest in financial well-being in the workplace, both in research. 65%, I think, of Australian companies have indicated they're planning to spend more on financial well-being as we start to understand some of these correlations. But it's also something that we're seeing in practice. Advisors and super funds coming to us and saying, we go and deliver seminars in the workplace and people love them. And, it generates new business for us and what have you. But actually, it's a way to deliver some of the benefit of advice to a bigger cohort of people. Can you support us in a digital sense to do that? That's something that we're really closely looking at for how we think about both lighter forms of advice and guidance and financial capability assets, and how IRESS can power financial advisors and super funds to deliver that in the workplace. Critically important. We're a lot less mature here in Australia than the likes of the States, who have a very well established understanding in the kind of professional spheres of the connection between an investment in financial capability, driving a better wellbeing outcome and better retention and all the other profit uplift outcomes in the workplace. And again, to go back to the comment you made before about education and outreach, one of the great challenges, of course, is putting this stuff in the spaces where people are both spending their time and are open to it. And the workplace actually, because there's mutual benefit, is a great space for that. So we think that's a big opportunity beyond the kind of delivery of financial literacy and capability programs through schooling. We also think that there's a critical role through someone's working career for us as an industry to support employers to deliver lifetime financial wellbeing. And again, to your other point about the pre-retiree, if we're nudging and supporting right the way through a lifetime as people come to those big decision points and what have you. I think by the time we get to that kind of pre-retirement scenario, then hopefully we've done a good job of getting someone to a better decision-making place.
Yeah, I love the idea on the workplace. I mean, it's a captive audience to an extent. Maybe we need a little less yoga and fruit bowls and a bit more.
Well, let's not give up the fruit bowl.
Oh yeah, okay. Well, let's not go crazy, and maybe keep the yoga. I like yoga as well, but I do feel it's a great story for employers, and you know we have a lot of employers listening to this podcast, and even small businesses. Like I was at an advice firm's offsite a couple of weeks ago, and I asked the room, there was all these conversations, and I asked, how many of you have actually seen a financial planner in your own right?
Yeah,
And only one hand went up. And I couldn't believe it. I said, surely whenever someone joins this business, they should
totally.
get a session with one of our advisors.
Yeah. Well, look, I did the same exercise here, quite honestly, and went past how many people have seen an advisor to put your hand up if you are entirely comfortable that your money is sorted for the rest of your life. There was not a hand in the room. And so probably an oversight on our part. We're starting to deliver the financial capability services that we do for super funds and advisors, finally, to IRESS people. It's critical,
Awesome.
right?
Yeah. And that will help. I love that you're doing that. I actually heard that from someone else that, you know, more IRESS staff are getting advice. And I thought, shit, it will really help you build better products too, because I think you'll start to understand all sides of it.
I still think that if you aren't able to spend significant amounts of time in the shoes of people giving advice, it's got to be by definition so much harder to create software that's going to transform how that's done.
So I guess, you know, we've well and truly unpacked the problems, and it's quite obvious that the broad brush solutions aren't going to work in this one. We'll have to be quite nuanced with it. So the report has 9 pretty important recommendations of things we have to tackle. Could you maybe just talk us through maybe the top 1 or 2? And I think I'd like you to pick one that you think has the most national impact. So the one thing that we could do as a country that we need to get behind, and maybe, you know, that we could get our listeners who are, you know, speak to their local member about, and those things important. And probably number 2, the second one, for things that you think financial advisors could take on board for their own businesses moving forward.
All right. I'll do my best to keep it 1, but it might be 1A and 1B.
That's fine. Yeah, no problem.
I do think in terms of what needs to be done, breaking the money taboo is the most critical, because if we can't talk about it, the problem's never going to be dealt with. That's fundamental. But from an actionable kind of perspective, probably the thing that we believe most needs to happen, and we're certainly agitating for, we've gotten ASFA, FAAA, and the FSC in agreement that this needs to happen. The definition of, with tight guardrails that everyone can understand, this awkward middle ground between general advice and personal advice, such that we don't talk to a 20-year-old the same way we do, for instance, a 60-year-old, and think that we're risking moving into personal advice. That is absolutely critical, because there is no way in the world that we are going to get a 20-year-old to listen to the same story that you tell to a 60-year-old.
Yeah, I'm sure prostate health doesn't land as well with an 18-year-old as a 65-year-old.
And even the use of the term retirement is arguably completely irrelevant. It's a totally different language and nuance required for that cohort. So the number one thing we think needs doing here is to enforce a redefinition of the edges of advice. What is help? What is guidance? What is personal financial advice? We are pushing for a conversation in politics. We're meeting with a senator this week to help understand what needs to be done to put that agenda back on the table, to drive for that regulation to be made clear, and hope that the government starts to take action to deliver financial capability through schools. So from a call to action point of view, we'd love your help. Do speak to your local member and reinforce the importance of financial literacy and capability being an agenda item. And let's get our act together and define the guardrails of what we call guidance, because it's critical for all of our futures. So that's the critical change that we believe needs to happen. From an IFA advisor perspective, we also think beyond those actions, there is quite significant opportunity in this space as it gets defined to deliver general education advice, not just as a lead generator, but increasingly as a dedicated standalone business model. Think here about the advice practice not turning up in the workplace and delivering a seminar and leaving, but delivering a digital financial wellbeing program. So we'd love to help power that. We've got most of the tooling already available now, but do it digitally in order to support it at scale. There is a direct, profitable commercial opportunity in that solution in its own right, but it is also proven by that research to be a generator of vastly better qualified and better capable clients. So what comes out of the back of that isn't just profit as a standalone business, but it's also highly qualified leads for the kind of clients who are going to be vastly more profitable because you're not explaining fundamentals to them. We think that's probably the greatest opportunity here for the IFA space.
Yeah, love that. And it's quite interesting, despite the fact that everyone talks about this supply gap, supply demand gap with advice, they still have a lot of advisors that need help finding clients. Believe it or not, we talk to a lot, and it's not so much they need help finding the right clients. That's probably the main thing. And
yes.
I've always had a view, even in our business, that if you go in with a spirit of generosity in terms of putting content and things out to the community and giving a free presentation at the school or the footy club or whatever it is, it comes back some way, somehow.
Absolutely.
Even if you're trying to curry a bit of favour with your local members, if they see you sponsoring the local footy club, providing education. I mean, little tip, they love hanging around footy clubs in Victoria, the politicians, because they've been giving out lots of grants to footy clubs to build new facilities. But you know what? If that's where they are and you see them at the barbecue and you say, hey, I'm an advisor, this is what we do for the club, we give some free education. So they certainly couldn't hurt us at the moment. We need that, as an industry.
Absolutely. And again, don't be afraid to think about a charge model for that is part of the message here. Goodwill, absolutely. And this industry has been charitable for a long period of time, delivering pro bono and helping where we can. But equally, there is a huge appetite in the market, that mid-market, those 12 million who don't necessarily need holistic advice, but are willing to pay something. That's a business model we're starting to see crop up more and more. In fact, I had a conversation with a fully qualified CFP. She's launched a really interesting business last week. She will not deliver personal advice. Her specialty, her value proposition is financial education and coaching delivered as general advice on an hourly rate. And she's been swamped because people want to understand and they want to be able to take actions themselves. People want to equip themselves. So by all means, do the freebies and that's important too. But I think it's really worth thinking about that, even if it's an outer layer of your service model that is a charged general advice, financial education offering is really interesting, we think.
Yeah, and I think those employer relationships are really important. And I'm sure many advice firms have business owners as clients who would be
most definitely
more than enthusiastic about that, and just probably who wouldn't even, because we always tell our clients how busy we are. Maybe we can just stop doing that and actually say, no, I'd love to come and talk to your staff, or whatever the case is. Those things will make a big difference. Final thing I want to finish on, Marcus, which I've just put you on the spot here a bit, is that, as I said at the start, we're both parents, and I think most people listening to this podcast are parents. Are there anything you've seen in the research, heard around, or even just yourself personally that you found have been effective for teaching either young or teenage children about money?
I think the really important distinction that the research draws is the distinction between knowledge and action. So you mentioned Spriggy. That's a great example because it is action. It is teaching in practice in a controlled and safe environment. All the theory in the world for most people is entirely useless. Like every single person that you would speak to would know you should spend less than you earn. And yet how many of us do it?
Yep.
So anything that allows the lessons of capability, and these are not complicated things. The Deloitte research defined 6 dimensions. They're not complicated. Like anything that allows safe experimentation to learn for oneself, the boundaries, is going to be really powerful. And the Spriggy example is a great one.
Yeah, just for people curious, Spriggy, it's SPRIGGY. RIGGY. If you jump on their website, both my kids have a Spriggy account. It gives them a little ATM card, which they can pick the Star Wars character or whatever's on trend for that card. But you actually get an app which links it all together, and they can actually put savings goals on there. They understand what's the dip. They actually have a spending pool and a savings pool, and they can engage with their parents and talk about those things. I had to teach my 6-year-old had to have a lived experience about. It was funny. He watches Daddy tap his phone or card all the time, and the stuff just gets paid for and doesn't realise what happens. And so we were away recently, and he wanted to spend some money at the shop at a caravan park we were at. And I said, mate, you got $10 for the whole weekend. And of course, he blew it in about 2 minutes, shouting all his mates.
Standard.
And so he actually just grabbed as much stuff as he could, and he just thought he could tap the card. And so when it didn't work, he actually threw the Spriggy away, just threw it on the ground and left it. And he said, well, it doesn't work. And I'm like, no, there is no money left. And so he was only 6, but it was kind of it just opened that conversation to say, mate, just because Daddy taps the card all the time, it does actually come from somewhere, and it runs out eventually.
And you know what you've just pointed to is beyond the action part of him realizing this is the limit. It sparked a conversation. And so it actually, those kinds of things then become critically important in breaking the money taboo, because you just had a conversation you would otherwise never have had, other than to say, no, I'm not buying you another bloody ice cream because I've spent enough money on you, which is just an abstract concept. It's like that story, Warren Buffett's best methodology to teach your kids about tax is to bite 30% off every ice cream they ever have. Nothing makes it more real.
I think I take 45, but anyway, which is probably closer to the real tax rates, right? There's some great tips. So look, just to finish up, Marcus, I suppose the report is really worth going through. So where can our listeners get access to the report?
If you Google The Big Lift, you'll find the dedicated website. You can see all the research highlights there. You can download the full report. But equally, if you want to have a dialogue around where this is headed and what role you might take in supporting advice being delivered to those 12 million, we'd love to hear from you and have a direct dialogue too.
Great. I'd also just encourage listeners, if you're not on the Advisely platform, make sure you sign up and get a membership for that. I'm sure there's lots of great content in there as well. And if you're an X-Plan user, lots of helpful content there as well. You'd be amazed. I'll use this opportunity again. It is a Wealth Tech podcast. There are so many things people don't know that their software can actually do for them. They don't take the time to find it. And IRESS has done a great job of putting resources there for that. So,
well, without people like you, Pete, for the insights that you deliver through that platform too. So thank you for your support of that.
No, it's been a pleasure. All right, Marcus. Well, it's been great to talk. This is sort of felt like a normal cup of coffee that you and I have had just from time to time. So I hope our listeners have enjoyed it as well. As I said, this sort of research I think is actually of national importance. It's an embarrassment that we have probably the world's best retirement savings pool, and yet one of the lowest levels of financial literacy. So this feels like a bit of a no-brainer to tackle. And I look forward to hearing some real stories from the field about what people are actually starting to do and implement this. And you never know, maybe some updates from IRESS and your industry associations on if you get some traction with the government. I think the government would be looking for a few wins on this front at the moment. So maybe we can see some action there. So thanks again for joining us today, Marcus. We'll drop some of those links in the show notes. Everyone's got a copy. And thanks to everyone for listening to another episode of the Wealth Tech Insider.
Thanks, Pete.